Nigeria's absent leader, medical treatment, has kept the president out of the country for months. Now, some Nigerians are saying enough is enough. I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Muhammadu Buhari. Resume or resign. That's what many people in Nigeria are demanding from their president, who's been out of the country for 3 months. Muhammadu Buhari has been receiving medical treatment in London since May. The government says he's getting better and will return to work any day now. But no one in Nigeria knows what's wrong with him. And his absence is only fueling frustration over what some see as a lack of progress in boosting the economy, improving security, and fighting corruption. For the first time, anger turned to violence this week, with security forces opening fire to disperse protesters who'd fought with Buhari supporters. Yvette McCullough has more.
100 days is a milestone in politics, a time at which to judge the success or failure of a new leader's tenure. But could 100 days in absentia prove to be a politician's undoing? Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari has been out of the country for more than that to seek treatment for an undisclosed illness. Many Nigerians are now calling for him to either resume duties or resign.
Where are the people that we call fathers? Why are you watching this nation go to ruin?
Protesters have been gathering in Lagos and Abuja throughout the month, demanding an explanation.
3 months, nobody's saying anything. Nobody knows anything. Nobody knows what the problem is.
How do we know that the president is fit to continue in office?
Buhari first went to London in June last year for what his office said was a persistent ear infection. He went back again in January for nearly 2 months. On his return, he didn't resume work straight away and missed cabinet meetings and Friday prayers. He left for London again on May 7th for follow-up treatment, which is still ongoing. Amid the growing protest, Buhari held an audience with ministers at his London residence.
At least by the press you are working very hard.
Looking frail, but in seemingly good spirits, Buhari insists he feels ready to return to Nigeria, but is waiting for his doctor to give him the all clear.
I live in London very elated, very excited, because we met our president in very good health. He has spoken to us, we exchange banters, and I think we can't ask for more.
When Buhari came to power in 2015, he came in fighting. The former military ruler declared war on corruption. He announced early on in his presidency that the militant group Boko Haram had been technically defeated, and he oversaw the return of many of the abducted Chibok girls. But critics argue his corruption war hasn't been effective, and there has been a resurgence of Boko Haram. Just this Tuesday, at least 28 people were killed in attacks at a refugee camp at northeast Nigeria. It has raised concern that the president's absence could lead to instability. But the government says there's no power vacuum, and Buhari has left the country in good hands.
There is no time limit as to how long a president is allowed to be sick. So the president has done the needful. He has handed over authority to his deputy. He has complied with the constitution, and the government is running absolutely well.
But many Nigerians are concerned by the secrecy surrounding Buhari's illness and are sceptical whether he will get well soon enough to finish his term. Yvette McCullough, the Newsmakers.
To discuss this further, let's cross now to our panel, and I'm joined from Cambridge by Tunde Dardi, who is the Deputy Chairman of the ruling APC party's UK chapter. From London, Kayode Ugundamisi, a Nigeria affairs analyst who is critical of the Nigerian government. And also from London, Nigeria counterterrorism expert Temitope Olodo. Let me start first in London with Kayode. First, tell us, why is there a problem here? If the vice president of a legitimately elected president takes over while the president himself is sick, why is it a problem?
It is a problem if you understand the configuration of Nigeria. Nigeria is made up of 6 geopolitical zones. There is tension within these geopolitical zones. And yes, the president has not done anything legally wrong. He has respected and obeyed the Constitution by handing over to his vice president. But morally, can you say that Nigeria is in a complete state of stability when over 100 days, the elected president, who is the arrowhead of the mandate, cannot be seen close to the country, anywhere close to the country? And then the ruling APC has not been transparent enough in terms of what is actually wrong with the president. A president, a ruling party that is forthright with the people, would allow for an independent medical team to assess the president and let us know if the president is well enough to continue, if indeed is capable of recovering fully to take over the mantle of leadership. If he's not, he's a respected individual. There's a need for the acting president to become a full president and appoint a vice president so that the country can prepare for elections that will be coming up in 2019, which is just a few months away.
A few years away. Okay, Tunde, why isn't your party, at the very least, just being transparent about the president's medical condition?
I believe that my party has been very transparent enough. Like Kayode has said, the president has followed due process of the Constitution by law, and that the fact that people are asking the president to tell them or the party to pronounce what actually the ailment or the health issue of the president are is something that shouldn't be a thing of concern, because the president as an individual has the right to seek medical attention. He's done the needful. He's handed over the baton of governance to the vice president, who is excellently doing well. The business of governance is going on smoothly, and I don't see reason why people are just clamoring for the president not to look after himself very well. And it's within his right to keep. It's within his right, and under the Protected Act and Confidentiality Act, for the president to keep his health issues to himself.
Okay.
Not until if he decides to say his consultant or medical teams, he directed them otherwise. But
okay.
As far as I'm concerned, right now the president is all right. The president is okay. He's just trying to listen to instructions from his consultants.
Okay. Temitope, I see you have some thoughts. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm a bit surprised. I think we're all matured enough to know that equity will not allow the law to be used as an instrument of fraud. I have the greatest respect for Mr. President. We all wish him well as Nigerians. But I think my brother over there is quite not is economic with the truth when he says that the health of the president and what happens to him as #1 citizen is his private affair. It is not. He is in Nigeria, he is in the UK, on the courtesy of the Nigerian government. He's spending our money as taxpayer. Our planes are on standby for him. You know, that's our plane, that's our money. We deserve more. And I think he's also economic with the truth if he says everything is running smoothly. As we speak, you know, Boko Haram have used more women in the fight on terrorism than any other terrorist group in the world. 384, 244, 180 girls used for terrorist attack in January alone. You know, the corruption war, yes, it's being fought, but it's not being fought appropriately.
I'd like Kayode to pick up on that as well. What do you think is being compromised as a result of President Buhari being away for this long?
A lot has been compromised. Terrorism, the insurgents of Boko Haram in the north, is as a result of the absence of the president. The military seems to be slowing down on the gains they've made. They captured 17 local governments, hitherto held by Boko Haram. The vice president is just seen as someone who does not really have the power, even though constitutionally is meant to have full presidential powers. So ministers don't even know what to do. They're waiting for the body language of a president who is out of the country. So the country is moving, but at an extremely slow pace, contrary to the promise made by the ruling party, APC, which says instant change, revolutionary change for the country. And that is why it's important that there need to be clear about the health of the president. Let me add one thing. What is happening within the ruling APC that used to be an opposition party is lack of courage. No one is courageous enough to go to the president and say, look, thus far no more. We respect you. The country admires you. There are many people on the street. If you look at the protesters, they were unable to gather enough people to storm the streets because Nigerians respect this president, but Nigerians are also realistic about their future, that the fate of the country would not be tied to the fate of the president. If they are not aware of what is wrong with the president, they don't know what the future lies for the country. And that is why it's important that someone within the ruling APC should be courageous to tell this to the president.
Kayode, let me ask you very quickly, though, how much longer would the opposition and critics of the president be willing to wait for his return?
I think the question is how much longer are Nigerians willing to wait? Because right now in Nigeria, there's nothing like an opposition
including
party.
Buhari's supporters
there's not
as well.
A lot of difference.
How much longer can this go on?
Yes, that is. I think the Buhari supporters are becoming much more vociferous about the absence of the president. I think people are writing more. If you go on social media, more Buhari supporters are asking questions now. I think by the time we do not see this president in the next 1 month, you would have more people demanding and asking questions, especially asking for the National Assembly, even if it means reviewing the Constitution. The presidency are taking advantage of the lacuna you have in the Constitution that gives any president, not just Buhari, the right to be away out of the country for as long as the time in which he was elected into his office. And this must change.
Okay, Tunde, let me ask you then. 1 month. Do you think the president can return to his office in 1 month's time and resume his work running the country? And if he doesn't, what political alternative will you be able to offer?
I believe the very first thing we have to be grateful to is that in recent weeks, the president has been seen receiving different holders of office in government, including his media team. And he has really spoken that, yes, he's all right, he's ready to return to work, but needs to take order from his physician. And at that, it's clear that in no time, the president might be back at his position. The other thing that I would disagree with Kayode and Temitope on is on the issue of the fact that things are slowing down because of the absence of the president. No, governance is a continuous process, and it is clearly written, and it is clearly seen that quite a lot of progress are being made on a daily basis. Quite a lot of governance activities are going on. The acting president has signed the budget. The acting president swore in ministers. The acting president has appointed replacement for permanent secretaries. The acting president is doing one thing or the other that is supposed to be done, even that is supposed to be done by the president. And by virtue of the mandate that brought them in, they are really working. So we need the president to be ill and healthy in order for him to be able to continue the challenges and that trust that is reposed on him by Nigerians. And I know that the president will never disappoint Nigerians because of the fact that he has the height of fighting corruption, which he has started. He has the height of curbing insurgents. He has the right, and is somebody who abides by the law, by constitution, and by beliefs in freedom and rights of individual Nigerians.
Okay, Temitope, let me ask you how confident you are that the president will indeed be back in action soon, as his party claims.
For me, I think it's important to highlight that I totally agree that some work is being done, but what we're saying is that everything is slowed down. In a normal democracy, what you normally have is that there's a free hand to do for the vice president or the acting president to work, but we all know on the ground that is not what is happening. However, that being said, I think it's important to state for the record that it's not how long it takes the president to come back. I think, like my brother Kayode mentioned, it's about the sincerity of the government in place to highlight that these are the challenges that the president is going through, and for us all to feel that the acting president is actually working with no hindrance. We all know that the acting president is not free to do whatever he wants to do. He still needs to report back. There are people that are still taking files to London for the president, even though he might not want to see those files, and the president is still seeing people from OPEC and other places. If he needs to relax, he should come back home to relax home, but not be seeing visitors in the UK and saying he's waiting for his doctors to give him a free bill of health to return back to Nigeria.
Tunde, I'll let you respond to that quickly. Is it just an issue of him feeling he has to listen to his physicians in the UK and not return home to recover in Nigeria?
I believe what Okpe is saying is not the truth of the matter, that the acting president is not is being under restriction. That's not it at all. The vice president is doing what he's supposed to do according to constitution. Yes, definitely. Before some decisions are taken, you look at the pro and cons, and definitely you have to consult with the National Executive Council. You have to take the party's manifesto into consideration. You have to take a lot of things into consideration. Even the agitations here and there, and the thing is that the president has had his head come back to life, and definitely coming back, that means that for the president himself to be receiving visitors shows an instance that the president, there's not been anything hidden about the president health. Everybody knows that, okay, the president is unwell, but now recovered, now all right. And he started receiving visitors and whole perspective. So definitely it shows that, well, we have to thank God first. We have to be grateful to God that the prayer of Nigerians is being answered based on that, and the president is ill and not it. But like the president rightly said, he's waiting for clearance from his consultants.
Okay, Kayode, I saw you had a response. I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, Nigerians did not they didn't vote a medical doctor in the UK to decide when their president is fit or not fit. Nigerians voted for a strong man that everyone, almost the whole country, supported to govern and rule them. And if people don't even know what is wrong with him, how are we sure when he's going to come back? Even if he comes back physically looking okay, how are we sure he's mentally all right to multitask and deal with the difficult situations and conditions that is going, mirage of problems that is confronting Nigerians? There's a need for the APC, which used to be very loud and vociferous when it was in opposition in terms of accountability, to practice what they preached when they were in opposition. And a lot of us who support this government to come in need to ask the right question. And sometimes loyalty to the country is more important than the loyalty to a particular man. Nigerians do, of course, follow this president. They admire him, but they want to put their country first. And once there is transparency, Nigerians are quite forgiving. The fact that after 100 days, Nigerians are not out there on the streets shows the amount of respect they have for President Buhari. But they cannot be sort of taken for a ride for so long. From Kano, where the president has got a very large followership, people are asking critical questions. Where is the Buhari we voted for, who promised to fight corruption, hold looters to account, improve the economy, create employment and jobs for young people, and of course provide leadership for the country? It's important that the APC gets transparent and bring the president, the real situation of the president out to the Nigerian public. Okay,
let me ask Temitope, though. In the meantime, we're seeing these violent clashes break out between Buhari supporters and some in the opposition. How much violence do you think might be to come if he doesn't return, and how much will be tolerated?
Yeah, for a president to be out of his country 150 days out of 365 days is totally unacceptable. But we do understand that he has health issues that need to be addressed. And I think there is a tension that is growing. We know that the individuals responsible for the resign or return campaign have suspended their campaign in Abuja and moved it to Lagos. And we know that there is a brewing opposition here in the diaspora with over 10 million diasporans who might be calling and who were responsible, actually, even though they did not vote, for the removal of Jonathan through their campaign online. I don't think Buhari wants that same thing. And I think it's important to also highlight very quickly that David Cameron was not removed because he lost the election. He resigned honorably because the referendum did not go his way. So was the Japanese emperor, who decided to sit back because he was too old and unhealthy to rule. So it's honorable for him to leave that seat for somebody else if he thinks he's not fit for purpose. But we should not be ruled by cabal. And he needs to know that we all love him, we all support him, but there is need for him to resign if he cannot return back.
Okay, we just have a minute left. I'll give final words to Kayode and then Tunde. Kayode, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think it's quite important to be very clear to supporters or those who think the Nigerians who oppose the president oppose him as an individual. It's about the institution of the presidency and the importance and the need for Nigeria to move on. The danger of not managing this very well is that violent clashes such as you witness in Abuja might replicate themselves all over the country. And we don't want the health of the president, the health issues about the presidency to degenerate into civil clashes within the country. The president has got a large cult following in northern Nigeria, and pretty soon he will be seen as a north-south divide. And this is one thing the APC needs to manage properly. Okay, Tunde, how much violence will be tolerated before the president or your party makes a call?
I believe that very, very soon the president will return. All I have to tell Nigerians is the president has done the right thing. He's followed the great steps as enshrined within Nigerian constitution. Governance is being run the right way. And the only thing is that we have to be patient and calm for the president to come so that we don't turn Nigeria to a state of anarchy, a state where government tools can be used to curb violences. Give APC this chance to perform as we have promised. We are just 2 years, 3 months in government that has been totally in a deplorable, within a state of totally deplorable condition for over 16 years. Understood. I believe Nigerians should be calm. The president is coming back.
Okay, Tunde Dordi, we're going to have to leave it there with you. I'll give you the last word. Thank you so much for joining us from Cambridge. Kayode Ugundamisi and Temitope, both from London. Thank you so much for being on the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, unscathed by scandal. Despite thousands of drug war deaths and a growing insurgency in the South, President Rodrigo Duterte remains as popular as ever. We head to the Philippines to find out why. And a landmark ruling for the rights of Brazil's indigenous people. Does this signal a new era for land protection, or is there another courtroom showdown ahead? Welcome back to the Newsmakers. He's a president nicknamed the Punisher, and Rodrigo Duterte's approach to his war on drugs tells you why. Wednesday was the single deadliest day since the Philippines president's crackdown on drug dealers began, with police killing at least 32 people. Duterte called the killings beautiful and said he wished every day was like that. It's his policy and often shocking style of speaking that has the international community so alarmed. Yet more than 1 year into his term, his domestic popularity continues to soar. Randolph Nogel explores why that is in the final installment of our special coverage from the Philippines.
In the Philippines, it is really an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
His supporters love him.
To solemnly swear.
As much for his heavy-handed tactics.
He's like a father. He's a very strict father.
As they do his irreverence.
The Republic of the Philippines has a president with a foul mouth. Correct, sabi ko. I am that president.
It won't matter if people should be sacrificed for that matter, as long as the totality of the people itself would benefit.
But his critics say his campaign against drugs is taking a toll.
It actually shatters, it divides communities.
Until the last pusher and the last drug lord are...
While President Duterte is prone to hyperbole, his comments about condoning the killing of not only drug pushers, but also drug addicts, have alarmed many. The police say they take every precaution to preserve life during drug raids, but some of the people we've spoken to in frequently targeted communities like this one say that police are known to shoot first and ask questions later. In Metro Manila, the human cost of the drug war is counted at night. I went to a local police station to see for myself. It didn't take long for a call to come in. This young man was shot to death near a fish market. His father was nearby. We asked him if his son was involved with drugs. He only told us that he told his son not to get involved.
We know and we receive information that families are no longer reporting the killings. In fact, there have been piles of bodies that have been processed in funeral parlors, and families don't get them anymore because they're scared. They might be branded.
So this campaign has become so aggressive that not only if you're not a drug dealer, not only if you're not a drug user, but if you're even affiliated with somebody branded as that, you can be targeted.
Yes.
We met the widow of a low-level drug pusher who was killed in a police raid. We've concealed her identity at her request for fear she could be targeted for speaking out.
The police raided the house with the intention of killing, because if it was just a raid, they would have stated that when knocking on the door. But when they knocked and the door was opened, they immediately started to shoot.
But police say they only shoot when fired upon.
What's the mentality of a drug pusher on the street? They will always carry a gun. So when there's a buy-bust, there's a sting operation, the tendency is to use that firearm, to get away and use that firearm. If they use that firearm, we will respond commensurately.
Supporters of the drug war say it's bringing down crime overall, even if people associated with drugs are being killed.
Even if robbery is down, carnapping is down, you still have murders which are up. It's all about destabilizing, destroying the very concept of human rights. And in the guise of course, this government is only for the law-abiding, and if you're not, you don't have human rights.
Randolph Noble, The Newsmakers in Manila.
Well, for more now, I'm joined from Manila by the social media director of Duterte's 2016 presidential campaign, Lavinia. From New York, we have Phlillimpines, who is the deputy director of the Asia Division at Human Rights Watch, and in Hong Kong, journalist and East Asia specialist, Stephen Vines. Thanks all so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Let me start in Manila. Pompey, why do Filipinos so approve of a president who so proudly admits to extrajudicial killings, he offends long-term allies, and he really continues to shock people with his sometimes vulgar rhetoric? Why these beautiful approval ratings for President Duterte?
First of all, he has never admitted extrajudicial killings, okay? But why is he popular? He's popular because of the war on drugs. It is something that the Filipino people agree with him on. If you notice the last surveys of the two survey companies here, the Social Weather Station, 78% approval on his war on drugs. And it happens to be also his approval rating among Filipinos, 78%. So the main driver of that popularity really is the war on drugs. Now, on the vulgar language with longtime partners, it's really an expression of also the Filipinos' frustration of not having been able to chart an independent course. Foreign countries always trying to impose their will upon us. And his his selection or his choice of an independent foreign policy is something that a lot of Filipinos support. But the main driver is really the war on drugs, and actually it's drugs and criminality.
Okay, let me ask Phelim, in New York, winning a war on drugs isn't necessarily a bad thing, but why do you think Duterte really isn't good for the Philippines?
Well, I mean, at first we need to clarify our terms here. And if you take a look at the profile of the victims of this so-called war on drugs, it's actually more accurately a war on the poor. And when you talk about Duterte's popularity, undeniably, you know, amongst the 38% of the electorate that went to the polls last year to vote for him, he still has strong support. But I think it's important to remember that I can't speak to the methodology or reliability of these popularity polls, but what I do know is that the government and pro-Duterte forces in the Philippines have been conducting a relentless and very sophisticated campaign of misinformation on traditional media and social media, and the narrative is this, that the government and police have killed around 3,000 quote-unquote drug lords, and every single one of those people fought back. That's why they were killed. Now, take a look at the facts. At least 7,000, maybe as high as 12,000 Filipinos have been shot down dead in the last 12 to 13 months. And Human Rights Watch's research, Amnesty International's research, research by Philippine journalists and foreign correspondents show absolutely unquestionably that what is going on is a killing campaign, an unlawful killing campaign by the Philippines National Police and their agents, targeting some of the poorest, most marginalized communities in the Philippines, urban slum dwellers. So there is this misinformation campaign for people not really knowing, well, what are the facts? Now, the other important issue is that in the Philippines today, anyone who challenges the narrative of the government is subjected to withering harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence. Yesterday, President Duterte threatened to kill human rights advocates who criticize his war on drugs. He has in the past threatened lawyers as well. Exhibit A of how high-profile targets can even be brought down by Duterte is Senator Laila de Lima, who called for accountability and an official investigation into the killings and was instead targeted with politically motivated drug charges, and she's behind bars right now. So challenging the government's narrative is extremely dangerous.
Pompey, I'll let you respond in 1 minute, but please let me just ask Stephen, first of all, in Hong Kong.
Yes.
Hold on one second. I just want to get Stephen's perspective, which I'll also let you respond to, Pompey. But Stephen, as one of those foreign journalists that was referred to, and as an observer from the outside, let's say, why do you think President Duterte's ratings are so high, given especially what we've heard from Human Rights Watch?
Well, on the one hand, he has a good story. I mean, in the sense he's a very effective communicator. He's a good populist politician. And he says, I represent the little man. And after all, the majority of the people in the Philippines are very poor. So if somebody comes along and says, look, I'm one of you, I'm going to be acting on your behalf. The fact of the matter is, we've heard a lot about the war of drugs, but before when President Duterte was a candidate, he spoke a lot about eliminating poverty. So you have to ask yourself, has anything been done on that front? I would say the record there is very slim indeed.
Okay. Pompey, I'll let you respond. And it's interesting to note two different interpretations. While Human Rights Watch says it's not as much a war on drugs as it is a war on the poor people of the Philippines, we've heard a journalist say that it's the poor people who like him the most. Go ahead.
Well, it's a very condescending view of that man in New York. You know, our academics here, our survey firms are just as competent as the survey firms in America. You know, the University of the Philippines. And these are not, when Duterte's ratings went down, they reported it. During the elections, when he was behind, they reported it. And so there's no reason to even question that, except that it's not American. And the judge of what is legal or not in the Philippines is not somebody in New York, in a desk, but the Filipino people. Now, the biggest spreader of false news is Human Rights Watch, because Senator de Lima is not a political prisoner. She's accused of violating the drug laws in the Philippines.
and we have a court system here that she herself believed in and used when she was the Secretary of Justice. So for it to suddenly now become politically motivated, you know, we have our processes here. It's not perfect, just like the processes in the United States are not perfect. But, you know, we do have it, and there's prima facie evidence, there's probable cause. She has not been convicted, but our laws here says that certain crimes you're not entitled to bail. And the judge in this case ruled that under that she goes to jail. Just because she's an enemy of the president politically does not make the charges politically motivated.
Okay, Phelim, go ahead. I'll let you reply to that one.
Yeah, well, Mr. Lavinia, it's interesting how he dodged the main issue, which is the slaughter of up to 12,000 Filipinos without any due legal process. And Mr. Lavinia, it's interesting that many of those victims are children, and your president, who you defend so vociferously, refers to those child victims as quote-unquote collateral damage. But the key issue here, you can talk about popularity until, you know, all day. There's an issue of legitimacy. And Mr. Lavinia, you might want to think about this. President Duterte was elected to defend and protect the protections and the rights within the Constitution of the Philippines, okay? He has trashed those rights and freedoms. He has thrown due legal process under the bus. And for you to defend someone who quite likely may be facing crimes against humanity charges in an international court in the not too foreseeable future, that is a dangerous situation. So, and in regards to Senator Leila de Lima, sir, it's been absolutely shown that the government's relentless, absolutely scathing harassment, intimidation, and politically motivated charges against her are totally linked to the fact that she challenged Duterte's unlawful killing campaign. The facts are out there, sir. Doesn't matter whether you try to blow smoke on them. Well, the facts are out there.
You are not the judge of that. It's the Philippine courts that are the judge of that, not you. We have our court systems here, and they will determine our fate. The Filipino people will determine how we will deal with drugs, not somebody in New York. Now, nobody, sir, is saying that nobody has been killed here, but we have a war on drugs, which the Filipino people support. Filipino people feel that it's a matter of survival. You have mayors, you have governors involved in drugs, and this is the way the Filipino people have chosen to deal with it. Now, you can have your opinion, you can bring charges to international court, but you cannot impose your will on the Filipino people.
Okay, let me bring Stephen Vines back.
Lavinia, it's not, well, just very quickly, Mr. Lavinia, it's not me in New York who's talking here. We're talking, I'm sharing with you the opinions and concerns of the officer of the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, of the head of the Human Rights Agency at the United Nations, the special rapporteur on extrajudicial killings. Mr. Lavinia, I need to tell you that there is a legal issue called incitement and instigation toward crimes against humanity. And your very vocal support for what is quite obviously an unlawful killing campaign that has killed thousands of Filipinos in cold blood, sir, that puts you in a potentially awkward situation moving forward legally.
Okay, I'd like to bring Stephen back into the conversation. We just have a few minutes left.
I do not fear. I have no fear of what you're saying. I am going to support the view of the Filipino people.
Okay.
He is our elected leader, and we agree with him.
And then
so
Stephen,
if there are charges, let there be charges.
Stephen, let me ask you, is there any line Duterte could cross that would actually turn the tide of popularity against him?
Well, that's a very interesting question because, unfortunately, I'm a bit old. And I remember a period in the Philippines when President Marcos, who was another, in his day, very charismatic, very populist president, who had very high popularity ratings. But, and as Mr. Lavinia knows perfectly well, he was the man who was brought down in the People's Power Revolution because at the end, people are not stupid. They understand that a president has to deliver the goods. Just filling the mortuaries with dead bodies isn't delivering the goods. And I don't think anybody in the Philippines, including whoever is in the studio today, speaks on behalf of all the Filipino people. It's a divided society, particularly in the urban areas. And there are a lot of people who are adamantly opposed to President Duterte, as well as he has a lot of supporters. But, you know, his support will diminish very, very quickly when people find that he's not delivering the goods. And at the moment, he's delivering dead bodies.
Okay. And Philim, I assume you believe Filipinos who do support him now will regret, will live to regret that support?
Well, I mean, I think what we're going to see is that we're going to see, because of the wealth of evidence, that this, again, this war on the poor, this indefensible, unlawful campaign that's killed maybe up to like 12,000 people in 13 months. You know, the facts are out there, and people who have supported this, people who have incited this campaign, instigated it, the people who have been pulling the triggers, there is going to come a time of accounting for this. You know, the wealth of evidence is overwhelming. And so, you know, whether those people who voted for President Duterte have buyer's regret because they're concerned about the bloodshed that ensued, I mean, that should be a concern.
Okay, Pompey, I'll let you finish. I mean, in the long term, what do you believe Duterte will give to the Philippines through his leadership that no other leader has given before and that will maintain this popularity?
Well, the war on drugs, the fight against criminality, the fight against corruption, an independent foreign policy, which means we will decide our fate, not foreigners, a shift perhaps to a federal system. All of this really is an attempt to build a strong middle class here in the Philippines to fight poverty. And they may disagree with it, but that's the course the Filipino people have chosen. And I find it quite condescending for foreigners to try and scare us. Fine, you know, I mean, we live by our decisions. But, you know, that is the fate, that's the decision the Filipino people have made. And I don't want to make a comment about Marcos, you know, because I was a student leader opposed to Marcos, and I don't remember him entirely being popular. He was very unpopular, very, very different from the president now. I don't know what kind of false reality they want to believe just to make their narrative of the president, you know. There's almost an implication there that Filipinos are too dumb to see reality. You know, Filipinos are just as intelligent as the people in New York or Hong Kong. We see the facts. We see what's happening. Yes, we know there's 12,000 people dead. It's a war on drugs. We don't agree that it's a war on the poor. Majority of the Filipinos happen to be poor, and a lot of the drug-infested areas are in the slum areas. That's a fact. That doesn't make it a war on the poor.
Okay, Stephen, I saw you trying to speak there. I'll give you the last 20 seconds if you can finish.
Well, I'd just say very quickly, this is a false historic narrative. Marcos was the president for a long time. At the beginning of his presidency, he was very popular. Maybe you were too young to remember that. But the fact of the matter was that disillusion set in. If you were a student leader at the time of People's Power, obviously disillusion had set in. And, you know, it's a warning. On the contrary, I don't think Filipinos are stupid. I think they're quite intelligent. And in the end, they realize how badly the government has treated them. And that was why you had People's Power in the late 1980s.
Okay, Pompey Lavinia, Phlillimpines, and Stephen Vines joining us. Thank you so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Brazilian indigenous people are under threat today because some of their territories haven't been recognized yet. As soon as we start organizing ourselves to fight for our land, the big landowners hire gunmen and try to do everything to stop us.
Brazil's indigenous people feel under threat, but in a rare victory, the country's top court struck down a state's request for compensation for land given to tribes. But indigenous communities say their fight is far from over as they continue to resist attempts to force them off their land. Indigenous people make up less than 1% of the Brazilian population, but their territories cover around 13% of the country. Critics say that's too much land for too few people and argue it prevents economic development and progress. Brazil's constitution recognizes tribal ownership of traditional land, but the Supreme Court postponed ruling on a controversial case that seeks to reinterpret tribal borders in a process known as demarcation. The government is pushing to restrict their lands to only territory used by indigenous communities up until 1988. That's despite the fact that many tribes had been forced off their land long before then during the military dictatorship in the 1960s and 70s. Well, I'm joined now from Malaga in Spain by Francisco Dominguez. He is the head of the Latin American Studies Research Group at Middlesex University and the co-author of Right-Wing Politics in the New Latin America. Francisco, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, tell me if you see this latest ruling as a victory for Brazil's indigenous tribes, or do you just see too many challenges still to come?
I think it's a victory in the sense that the government was trying to get a legal opinion so that indigenous people who are not living in particular lands before 1985, that is to say before the current constitution, then they would not be entitled to live there. That was defeated. And the ruling by the Supreme Court is unanimous. That is to say, all the judges voted in favor of the indigenous lands rights, which is a significant victory, particularly in the current context. But it seems to me there is a huge amount that still have to go through in order for them to get the land that already been demarcated. But the government and various vested interests refuse to comply with the existing law.
Because they really are up against the interests of farmers and a number of politicians who believe that this land is better served for agriculture or development to serve the greater good of Brazil.
There is a sort of Occidental, I would say, view of it. They are seen, unfortunately, by many, particularly by agribusiness, who are really greedy for land. They are seen as an obstacle to be removed so that economic growth, economic development, and wealth can be created. But they've been there, for hundreds and hundreds of years. I think it's an ethical problem. There is plenty of land in Brazil for the indigenous population and themselves. In fact, the land that have been demarcated, recognized as their ancestral land, is a very small proportion of the land that exists in the country. Agribusiness can easily coexist with them, but they are so greedy that they are prepared to go against them. And they are normally attacked by people, hitmen who assassinate them, push them out of their land, and violence is used against them. And unfortunately, most of the authorities at the local level tend to be complicit in these activities against them.
So are you entirely in favor of protecting indigenous rights at all costs, let's say it like that, or is there a better balance actually to be found so that land can be used more productively by people who can serve the greater good of Brazil, and while ensuring indigenous rights and lands are still protected?
Well, provided that the principle, which is stipulated in the Constitution, that given that these are their ancestral lands, whatever development may take place is negotiated with them and they finally agree to it. Out of which, whatever possible development might take place in a particular land, actually they are compensated for it. What tends to happen is that vested interests, particularly agribusiness, as I said, tend to just use violence, which is completely unacceptable. I'm sure that the indigenous communities, and I've talked to several of them myself, are quite prepared to negotiate and to talk about possibilities of development that will benefit not only the greater good, but also themselves.
Do you fear now that that violence you say is being used against the indigenous people will actually increase?
I think it's likely because the political context in Brazil right now, by the de facto Temer government, has created a context within which forces of the state and vested interests have been used their power against everybody, social movements, trade unions, and so on. And given that the indigenous population in Brazil is a very small minority, I'm sure they would use everything they have in their power against them, particularly because they tend to live in remote areas where nobody knows what happens except much later after the event has taken place. And it works to the advantage of those who want their land.
And what do you make of Michel Temer, the current president in particular? Some say he has ulterior motives here because he has corporate interests personally involved. And also there's the issue that he might not be, given Brazil's current political climate, in office too much longer.
I think the reason why the Congress voted to sustain him by 174 votes against 136 recently, more than a week ago, was because many of them actually are the target of investigation for corruption. And they believed, I think, that if they had allowed him to fall at that particular point in time, then many of them would have been threatened by investigations themselves. They decided to sustain him for the time being until they find a way out of the crisis they find themselves in. Temer enjoys something like between 2 to 4 to 6% of rate of approval, one of the lowest, not only in Brazil historically, but also in the world. So I don't think he's going to survive too much longer. But the key remains in the hands of the politicians in the Congress and in the Senate. And so far, they've been unwilling to actually go for the last push, which I think they should do in order to open up the possibilities of that country, which at the moment are being, blocked.
Okay, Francisco Dominguez, we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.